peace agreement and labor relations. We've got to laugh over.
I know the guys, these guys, they don't like us having headings, but I love the titles.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our media briefing. My name is Kalalelo Masibi and I'm the spokesperson for the Public Protector, and I shall be chairing today's session. I will introduce the panel. On my far left is the Deputy Public Protector Advocate Kevin Malunga, and next to me is the Public Protector Advocate Thuli Madonsela. I would also like you to take note of the following housekeeping rules. We will have an opportunity for a Q&A session after the briefing, as well as one-on-one interviews. And when we come to that part, you will, by show of hands, given an opportunity to pose questions to the panel. But before we proceed, I would like to convey the Public Protector's apology to the South African Post Office. The Public Protector regrets that the South African Post Office had to learn through the media that the report will be released today. And we apologize for that, just to overlook informing them well in advance. We would also like to welcome the complainants that have brought the complaint to the Public Protector to be investigated. And today we have Communication Workers Union, represented by its president, Mr. Clive Mervyn. And also present is the Communication Workers Union General Secretary, Mr. Obri Chabalala. The South African Postal Workers Union is also represented by its president, Mr. Andrew Sithole, as well as General Secretary, Mr. David Mangena. We welcome them and members of the media, as well as colleagues, to the briefing. We would also like to assure you that there are a number of reports in the pipeline, and we will hold a number of media briefings in the coming months to release them to the public. But before the Public Protector proceeds, the Deputy Public Protector will brief you on the ongoing investigation in Cleveland, in Umlazi, KwaZulu-Natal. It's over to you, DPP.
Thank you very much. I don't know if, I need a separate mic. Yeah, thanks. Thank you to members of the media. You may be aware that there's something that your partners in the media have been following with us, and this happened last year, in December last year. We went up to Durban after a report from a complaint from the Commonwealth Legal Association. Oh, is it? Oh, I thought it was on. My sincere apologies. You see why we need money. You see why we need funding. Because we are in the dark ages in terms of technology, clearly. As I was saying, I want to thank the members of the media who are here. We have had, as a sample of the kind of intervention that we get involved in on a day-to-day basis, by the thousands nationally, we were asked to get involved by the Commonwealth Legal Association, the chairperson, president, in particular Professor David McCoy Mason, and his team, who complained about the inadequate interventions, alleged inadequate interventions by the South African Police Service, the provincial government, that is the safety and security component, and of course eThekwini municipality, in regard to the Gleblands hostel. There were allegations at the time that more than, I think, 50 people had been killed within a space of a year or so. And of course, we were then asked to intervene concerning the way forward there. And of course, to get the organs of state in question to do their work. So we had an engagement with them on the 22nd of December last year, where various commitments were made. The security cluster made a commitment to deploy personnel in the affected area. As you may be aware, this is a volatile area. Over years, there have been killings, allegedly political and for other reasons, factions and so forth. But that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. And of course, we are informed that there's been a withdrawal of this particular contingent, and we are going to meet with them the day after tomorrow, that is Thursday morning, at our provincial offices in Durban to chart the way forward. And then of course we are then going to go back to Gleblands to meet the affected communities. Remember, when we went in December, a number of the people were not there because they were on holiday and so forth. And of course, what we want to get to the bottom of really is whether or not there's been changes, measures have been stepped up with regard to security, and of course we want the killings to stop. People have asked, but where does the public protector come in here? You know, I remember at the time when we went in. Remember, these are organs of state, and we have jurisdiction. Whenever there's an allegation of maladministration or inadequate or acts or omissions by an organ of state, we have a jurisdiction to come in and ensure that the work is done. So we are going to, on Thursday, meet the various community members, and of course, there are factions there. We will meet them separately, and we've asked them to and this is a sample. And then, of course, there were the service. So that's the service delivery aspect from the security cluster. There is also the service delivery issue concerning the provision of services by the municipality there. And of course, here you would have seen that there was dilapidation, there was water leaking, all over the place. And then, of course, there were ESCOM challenges. So all those issues are going to be addressed. Why we're raising this is because this is on a day-to-day basis, this is what the public protector is doing all over the country. Not just the conduct failure issues. There are also these service delivery, what we call administrative justice and service delivery issues, which I head in the main. And of course, you understand that very often where there are challenges with service delivery, there's usually, and we've proved this in our engagement with COCTA, that those are the places that usually flare up. And we want to thank the media for coming in and recording this when there wasn't a flare up. Remember, it was a very peaceful engagement, and they came with us, and we want to ask that, and we're talking about this with the public protector earlier on, that if you could replicate this in the sense that it not only focus on those areas where there are flare-ups, but where there are interventions and the challenges, and profile these areas before it gets out of hand. And that's very important for us. And so we are going to also engage, as I said, with the ESCOM, with safety and security and so forth. And then there's also the Kennedy Road informal settlement, where there are allegations again that the contract there is for the building of that particular settlement was inadequate and of course was improper on a conduct failure side. We are also pursuing that with eThekwini municipality. There is also, in that regard, we have received a report concerning an implementation plan, a project plan regarding service delivery in that regard. But why we're raising this, and of course this will form the theme of our next, probably our next media conference, is to say there are also these other matters on the ground by the thousands which we are getting involved in. And of course we have said that we also want that to be highlighted, because that's where the public protector as an institution has the highest impact. It's very important that, I know you love the Nkandlas, you love the post offices and so forth, but this is also the area that has by far the highest impact on you as citizens. And I think it's very important that you come on board and come to the party in this regard, because I mean, if you count the stats, that's where a lot of the files and a lot of the matters are. But I'll hand over to the public protector now for the main business of the day, which is the report on the post office. Thank you very much.
Members of the media, fellow people of South Africa, good afternoon and welcome to the Public Protector South Africa offices. My team and I are grateful to have you this afternoon, and we value your continued interest in our work. I also would like to thank the complainants for entrusting the Public Protector team with the investigation we are going to report on today. I thank the South African Post Office, the current management, for assisting us with getting all of the information we needed. Postponed delivery is my report as the Public Protector, which is being issued in terms of Section 182(1)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, and also in terms of Section 8(1) of the Public Protector Act 23 of 1994, referred to as the Public Protector Act. The report communicates my findings and the appropriate remedial action which I'm taking in pursuit of Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution. This follows an investigation into complaints lodged by the Communication Workers Union, the complainant, a labor union recognized by the South African Post Office, SAPO, which was lodged on the 16th of March 2011. The complainant alleged maladministration by the South African Post Office in leasing the EcoPoint Office Park in Centurion, Gauteng province to accommodate its head office. The complainant also complained about the procurement of the services of a catering company, the procurement and utilization of labor brokers, and possible corrupt relationships between some of the employees of SAPO and certain external service providers. The period covered by the investigation is restricted to transactions and conduct that took place between the 1st of April 2002 and September 2012. The transactions and activities covered are confined to the leasing of the EcoPoint Office Park, procurement of a catering company, and the outsourcing of work to labor brokers. The investigation period is from October 11 to January 2016. When the Communication Workers Union approached this office, it said the following, among other things, I quote, "The Public Finance Management Act is very clear against fruitless expenditure, and the move of the NPC to Eco Point clearly constitutes fruitless expenditure. If one takes into account the exorbitant rentals that the management of the South African Post Office is already paying before such a move is effected." The South African Post Office is currently applying fierce cost-curtailing measures across all its business units to the extent of disregarding operational excellence and customer centricity, including but not limited to implementing second-day delivery by delaying mail items meant for speedy delivery. Close quotes. The report tells a story of how, at the height of economic challenges that had adversely affected service delivery, the then management and board of directors of SAPO, the board, decided and went ahead to procure their current national office premises at the Eco Point Office Park in Centurion, while outsourcing some of the core functions to labor brokers. As the National Postal Service of the Republic of South Africa, SAPO is a strategic organ of state with an expenditure budget of approximately 6.5 billion and a projected revenue of approximately 7 billion per year, while having a staff complement of over 22,000 people, operating more than 2,500 postal outlets and points of presence throughout the Republic of South Africa. In addition to the provision of national postal services, SAPO has 3 subsidiaries, namely Post Office Logistics, Expedited Mail Services, and the Post Bank. In the last few years, SAPO has been the subject of various media reports dealing with cash flow and liquidity challenges, including inability to pay salaries at some stage. At the time of finalizing the report, SAPO had requested a cash injection from the National Treasury to be able to discharge some of its obligations. It is worth noting that the matters covered in the investigation occurred long before the current board of directors was appointed. SAPO is currently controlled by board of directors, the board, which is chaired by Dr. S. Lushaba. This board was appointed on 15 August 2015. The current group Chief Executive Officer, Mr. M. Burns, was appointed shortly before the investigation was finalized in January 2016. In its complaint, the Communication Workers Union alleged that during its relocation from the National Postal Center, NPC, from the Pretoria Central Business District, CBD, to the Eco Point Office Park, the South African Post Office appointed lily-white companies to render project management services despite lack of Black Economic Empowerment accreditation as envisaged by the SAPO BEE policy and strategy. SAPO's relocation from the NPC constitutes fruitless expenditure since SAPO ended up paying approximately 3.6 million per month towards rentals before its actual occupation of the building. A project manager was appointed to procure a catering company called FedEx, which was FedEx. This constitutes illegal outsourcing of SAPO's supply chain management responsibilities, and SAPO further failed to consult with the complainants. SAPO imposed restrictive financial measures that were implemented across its business units, resulting in delivery standards being compromised since a second-day delivery was implemented, thus delaying mail items destined for speedy delivery. It is suspected that there is a deep-rooted corrupt relationship between SAPO employees and employment agencies or labor brokers, which has informed irregular appointment of the said agencies or labor brokers who operated without a clear contractual relationship with SAPO. By the time the investigation was finalized and this report was issued, some of the implicated employees and SAPO board members had resigned and or terminated their employment with SAPO. A new board of directors and group chief executive officer, GCEO, had been appointed. It is worth noting that when the investigation commenced and the first investigation letter was written to the SAPO GCEO in 2011, SAPO had not moved from the Pretoria CBD to the Eco Point Office Park in Centurion. Accordingly, SAPO still had an opportunity to reverse some of its decisions on being alerted to the irregularities. It is also worth noting that by its own admission, SAPO continued months later to make further payments in respect of the empty Eco Point Office Park, despite the contract being silent on the date on which rent would become due, and there being no benefit accruing to SAPO from the payment of rental towards an unoccupied building. The duty to take action to curtail or arrest any irregularity on being warned about its possibility is according to the Constitutional Court in Kumalo and another, this is MEC for Education KwaZulu-Natal, imposed on all public functionaries by Section 195 of the Constitution. Such duty requires, among others, the promotion of efficient, economic and effective use of public resources. On analysis of the complaint, the following 5 issues were identified for consideration and to focus the investigation. A. Did SAPO improperly procure the Eco Point Office Park to accommodate its head office? Did the South African Post Office incur fruitless and wasteful expenditure through upfront payment of rental in respect of the Eco Point Office Park amounting to more than 3.5 million per month, while the building stood empty prior to occupation? Did the South African Post Office improperly appoint a project manager to procure the services of a catering company by the name of FedEx? And did the said procurement amount to illegal outsourcing of the South African Post Office's supply chain management responsibilities? Did the South African Post Office improperly implement severe service indifferent cost-cutting measures that disregarded operational requirements and compromised service excellence across its business units? Did the South African Post Office improperly appoint labor brokers with whom some of its employees had a corrupt relationship. The investigation process included interviews, exchange of correspondence, and meetings with former and current members of the board and senior officials, including the SY and current chairpersons of the board, the former and current GCEOs, and the former chief financial officers. The investigation also covered the consideration of laws and other prescripts regulating the impugned conduct. Key provisions relied on in this regard included Section 217 of the Constitution regulating public procurement and other provisions regulating procurement, among them the South African Post Office Act of 2011, the Public Finance Management Act 1 of 1999, commonly referred to as the PFMA, Treasury regulations, and internal corporate procurement policies, particularly the procurement policy of the South African Post Office, which was adopted in 2009. In view of allegations of corruption involving a possible financial interest by some of the South African Post Office officials in the labor brokerages that had been given contracts and which were said to have been appointed irregularly, the provisions of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act 12 of 2008 were also taken into account. The transversal principles of public administration articulated in Section 195 of the Constitution also offered guidance. For consistency, I have also taken into account touchstones or principles from previous public protector reports. Key reports in this regard include Against the Rules, issued in 2010. This report deals with similar alleged irregularities and questionable relationships involving the leasing of a building. All information and evidence gathered during interactions with the South African Post Office management and the complainant were taken into account in an effort to construct what happened and if what happened was in line with the law and other prescripts. After finalizing the investigation in January 2016, notices issued in terms of Section 7(9) of the Public Protector Act, alerting relevant parties of evidence implicating them and the possibility of adverse findings were issued. Discretionary notices were also issued to relevant parties. The responses received were analyzed and appropriately integrated in the report. I must indicate that it is heartening to record that the board of the South African Post Office did not contest any of the intended findings and remedial action. Commendably, the board candidly conceded that there had been systemic irregularities in financial and supply chain management at the South African Post Office. The board further advised that a process is underway to restore good governance. It also advised that the corrective measures that are currently being implemented include measures seeking to implement the findings of the Special Investigation Unit, SIU, and those of internal investigations, including outsourced investigations. In arriving at the findings, I have been guided by the standard approach adopted by the Public Protector South Africa as an institution. That approach involves simply asking, what happened? What should have happened? Is there a discrepancy between what happened and what should have happened? If there's a discrepancy, does the conduct amount to maladministration or improper conduct? If there was indeed improper conduct or maladministration, what would be the appropriate remedial action, or what action can be taken to ensure that we place the complainant or the people of South Africa to where they would have been if things had been done in accordance with the law and other prescripts? As customary, I approach the what happened inquiry as a factual inquiry settled on the assessment of evidence and making a determination on a balance of probabilities. To arrive at a finding on what happened, the investigation, like others, relied on oral and documentary submissions by the complainant, the South African Post Office management, and independently sourced information and/or evidence. The issue of what should have happened was settled through ascertaining the standard that should have been complied with by the South African Post Office in executing the transactions that are alleged to have been handled improperly. In determining the standard that the South African Post Office should have complied with to avoid improper conduct or maladministration, I was guided, as is customary, by the Constitution, relevant national legislation, and related regulatory instruments as indicated above. After examining and evaluating all the evidence obtained and measuring the conduct disclosed by the evidence against the standard that should have been upheld by the South African Post Office, had it complied with the regulatory framework, I have arrived at the following findings. 1. Regarding whether the South African Post Office improperly procured the Eco Point Office Park to accommodate its head office, the allegation that the procurement of the Eco Point Office Park to accommodate the head offices of the South African Post Office is substantiated. The allegation that the procurement of the Eco Point Office Park to accommodate the head office of the South African Post Office was irregular is substantiated. The South African Post Office's acquisition of a 10-year lease costing approximately 161 million in 2010 to house its national office at the Eco Point Office Park was tainted by procurement irregularities and corruption. At the outset of the process, the South African Post Office failed to ensure proper demand management before the acquisition of the Eco Point Office Park. This was because the business case on which the board relied on included misrepresentation of facts and falsified information regarding structural defects in the National Postal Center where the South African Post Office was accommodated at the time. The misrepresentations were also about the green status of the Eco Point Office Park, among others. The South African Post Office further conceded that in violation of the PFMA, the relocation to the Eco Point Office Park had not been captured in its strategic plan for the financial year 2009 to 2010. The South African Post Office Board further failed to ensure that the acquisition of the Eco Point Park building was preceded by a competitive bidding process, which conduct was in violation of the PFMA and its corporate procurement policy of 2009. The procurement of the lease for the Eco Point Park building was therefore not fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective as required by Section 217 of the Constitution, read with paragraph 311 of the South African Post Office Procurement Policy. The failure by the South African Post Office to follow a proper bidding process could not be justified under permissible deviations in terms of Articles 13.14 and 13.15 of the South African Post Office Policy and Section 51(1) of the PFMA, as there was no agency, and the Eco Point building was not the only building available to justify a single source deviation. The acquisition of the Eco Point Office Park building was accordingly unlawful. The board commendably took action against its officials, Mr. Jenkinson and Wenzel, when it was alerted to the fact that the business case the board had relied on, which had been prepared by these two on the relocation, and which prompted the board to adopt a resolution on 26 November 2009 to move to the Eco Point Park building, was riddled with misrepresentations of fact and falsified information. The board's action was also taken in pursuit of a finding by a KPMG report it had commissioned. That finding was that there had been a corrupt relationship between Centurion Vision Development, Pty Ltd, the owners of the Eco Point Office Park, and one of the South African Post Office officials who was at the center of the transaction. However, on receiving the KPMG report, the South African Post Office management and board failed to act expeditiously to review the deal with Centurion Vision Development, Pty Ltd, in the light of the finding of corruption, having the possibility of negating the legality of the transaction. This conduct was in violation of Section 195 of the Constitution. The acts and omissions of the erstwhile SAPO board regarding the acquisition of the Eco Point Park building accordingly constitute maladministration as envisaged in Section 65A of the Public Protector Act and improper conduct as envisaged in Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution. Regarding whether SAPO incurred fruitless and wasteful expenditure through upfront payment of rentals in respect of the Eco Point Office Park amounting to more than 3.6 million rand per month while the building stood empty prior to occupation, I find as follows. The allegation that SAPO incurred fruitless and wasteful expenditure in the form of irregular upfront rentals towards the Eco Point Park building before occupation is substantiated. However, the amount involved was not 3.6 million per month as alleged, but about 2.4 million. Furthermore, the irregular payments that were the subject of the original complaint were later considered as irregular and refunded. However, the South African Post Office subsequently made further payments towards the rental of the Eco Point Office Park for a 10-month period effective from May 2010 to March 2011. This amounted to approximately 22 million. And all of this was paid for rental prior to occupying the building. And this was contrary to the provisions of paragraph 2 of the lease agreement signed in February 2010, which provided that should the occupation be after 1 May 2010, then the commencement date shall be such later date. The conduct of the SWAL, South African Post Office GCEO, in approving the said payments for an unoccupied building was in violation of the provisions of Section 83 of the PFMA, which prohibits irregular expenditure and/or fruitless and wasteful expenditure. The acts and omissions of the South African Post Office regarding the fruitless and wasteful expenditure arising from the 10-month rental towards an unoccupied building constitutes maladministration and improper or unlawful enrichment of the owners of the building, Centurion Vision Development Pty Ltd, to the tune of 22 million. This constitutes improper conduct as envisaged in Section 182 of the Constitution. See? Regarding whether the South African Post Office improperly appointed a project manager to procure the services of a catering company by the name of FedEx, and whether the said procurement constitutes illegal outsourcing of the South African Post Office's supply chain management responsibilities, I find the following. The allegation that SEPO improperly appointed a company to project manage the procurement of a catering company, FedEx, to operate the canteen at the Eco Point building is not substantiated. However, the allegation that this amounted to outsourcing of supply chain management operations of the South African Post Office is substantiated. Indeed, the South African Post Office, through consultants called Infra Bureau, who were responsible for the project management of the move to Eco Point building, and asked them to appoint in tender to procure the catering services of FedEx through an online limited building process. Just to explain, it was a triple procurement where the South African Post Office procured Infra Bureau to procure in tender to procure FedEx to provide their catering services. This was approved by the South African Post Office Exco following a decision taken as part of the overall business restructuring of the South African Post Office to outsource all the non-core services. It was therefore not an isolated case of outsourcing of services, as approximately 56 other contracts were procured using this method. The South African Post Office Supply Chain Management Department was not involved in the procurement of Intender. Due to insufficiency of documents, though, regarding the process followed to appoint the project managers to manage specified procurement processes, I'm unable to adjudicate whether or not there was compliance with the prescripts, including fairness, transparency, competitiveness, and competence. I've avoided making a finding based on the findings of other investigations, for example, the SIU, and an investigation that was done by an audit company. Furthermore, whereas the procurement of the services is questionable in view of doubled costs and a heightened risk of non-compliance, the practice cannot be conclusively said to have violated paragraph 3.11 of the South African Post Office procurement policy. This paragraph makes provision for the appointment of service providers, including consultants, in accordance with a system that is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective, in line with the provisions of Section 217 of the Constitution. However, I am encouraged by the board's commitment to abandon the outsourcing of supply chain management functions, or the use of middlemen, as it were. I pondered whether we could use middlemen, but it does so happen that these companies are companies managed primarily by men, so maybe they are middlemen. Despite my immense discomfort regarding the outsourcing of procurement services, I am unable to find that the outsourcing of procurement to external project managers constitutes maladministration, as envisaged in Section 6, subsection 5A of the Public Protector Act, and improper conduct as envisaged in Section 182 of the Constitution. D. Regarding the allegation that the South African Post Office improperly implemented severe, regarding the allegation that the South African Post Office improperly implemented severe service indifferent cost-cutting measures that disregarded operational requirements and compromised service excellence across its business units, I make the following finding. The evidence regarding the allegation that the South African Post Office implemented extreme cost-curtailing measures which unduly compromised service delivery standards is inconclusive. By its own admission, the South African Post Office management did implement severe cost-cutting measures, and service excellence was compromised. However, although subsequent problems did include late delivery of items that in terms of internal and public promise standards should have been delivered earlier, it is difficult to specifically attribute the deficiencies to the cost-cutting measures. However, it is a source of concern that the South African Post Office moved to more lavish offices at much higher rental at a time when it was experiencing service-related financial constraints. The concern is exacerbated by the discovery that the business case for relocating from the NPC to the Eco Point Park building was doctored, and the relationship between a key South African Post Office official behind the move and Centurion Vision Development, the owners of the Eco Point Park building, was poisoned. Of equal concern is that there seems to have been inadequate, meaningful consultation of employees on the cost-cutting measures and use of labor brokers, among other important factors. I am encouraged, however, by the new GCEO's commitment to work in partnership with employees as change is managed towards a better functioning National Postal Services Agency. I am accordingly unable to make a finding of maladministration or improper conduct regarding the cost-cutting measures. E. Regarding whether the South African Post Office improperly appointed employment agencies or labor brokers with whom some of its employees had a corrupt relationship, I make the following finding. The allegation that the South African Post Office improperly appointed labor brokers who operated without written contracts is substantiated. However, the suspicion of corrupt relationships between certain South African Post Office officials and the labor brokers has not been substantiated. The South African Post Office irregularly appointed and utilized labor brokers from April 2002 to September 2012, with some of them having expired contracts and others with no written contracts, in addition to them having been appointed without following proper procurement processes as envisaged in its procurement policy and related laws. The total amount involved in the procurement of the labor brokers is estimated at about 2.7 billion rand. As these relationships were not properly regulated, the billing difficult, if not possible, to control to prevent irregular scope creep, overbilling, overcharging, and false billing. It cannot be said that the runaway expenditure involved did not contribute to the South African Post Office's current liquidity and cash flow problems. The South African Post Office's failure to follow proper procurement procedures was in violation of paragraph 311 of its procurement policy and section 51(1) of the PFMA, read with section 217 of the Constitution. The South African Post Office further failed to implement the recommendations of the KPMG report, advising that disciplinary measures be taken against some of its employees who could not ensure that contracts were put in place between the South African Post Office and labor brokers in violation of section 51(1)(e) of the PFMA. The South African Post Office's appointment of the labor brokers without following proper procedures constitutes maladministration as envisaged in section 65A of the Protector Act and improper conduct as envisaged in section 182 of the Constitution. The failure to implement the KPMG report fully also constitutes maladministration and dereliction of duties. The appropriate remedial action I am taking in terms of section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution is to require A. The South African Post Office Board of Directors to take effective and appropriate steps to do the following. 1. Recover the amount of 22 million that was paid to Centurion Vising Development in respect of upfront rental payment for the period May 2010 to March 2011. This was a time when the South African Post Office had not taken occupation of the Eco Plant Road. 2. End the use of external service providers to procure another service provider as a project manager, where the corporate supply chain management component is competent to deliver. 3. Ensure that the recommendations contained in the KPMG and SIU reports are fully implemented without any delay. And 4. Ensure that evidence pointing to the contravention of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act is submitted to the South African Police Services immediately. B. The Group Chief Executive Officer of the South African Post Office is to take effective and appropriate steps to do the following. 1. Review corporate supply chain management processes and procedures and ensure that systems are put in place to facilitate proper controls and compliance with supply chain management prescripts by officials handling procurement matters at all times. 2. Review the South African Post Office document management system and update it to ensure that documents relating to supply chain management processes, including contracts, are filed appropriately and are available when required. And 3, ensure that in future employees are properly consulted on planned adjustments to operations impacting on them and service delivery. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank the South African Post Office for its positive response to the Section 79 notices that were presented to the board and the GCEO. We would also like to thank the South African Post Office for ensuring that the problems identified by management and the board are being addressed, and there is an effort to redress deficiencies identified by internal processes as well as by the Special Investigation Unit. From our side as the Public Protector South Africa, our expectations going forward are that the leadership of the South African Post Office will do the right thing, which is to implement the remedial action I have taken in compliance with Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution. We will all know that in terms of the law, currently, when the Public Protector has made a decision and directed an organ of state to do something, the required compliance is to implement the remedial action. But if there's a problem, that organ of state has to engage this office and indicate where there might be a problem. If possible, we may assist with uncomplicating the situation. The authority for saying that organs of state have to comply with a decision of the Public Protector comes from the case of the South African Broadcasting Corporation and others versus DA and others. This is the law until the Constitutional Court makes a decision, which decision, of course, may be different to the Supreme Court of Appeal. In the case that I've referred to, the Supreme Court of Appeal held as follows, I quote, "Any affected person or institution aggrieved by a finding, decision, or action taken by the Public Protector might, in appropriate circumstances, challenge that by way of a review application. Absent a review application, however, such person is not entitled to simply ignore the findings, decision, or remedial action taken by the Public Protector. Moreover, an individual or body affected by any finding, decision, or remedial action taken by the Public Protector is not entitled to embark on a parallel investigation process to that of the Public Protector and adopt the position that the outcomes of that parallel process trumps the findings, decision, or remedial action taken by the Public Protector." Thank you.
Thank you, Public Protector. We have now come to the Q&A session. We will take the first round of questions. My colleague has a roving mic. We will identify you and he will bring the mic to you. But before you ask a question, we ask that you identify yourself by name and the media house that you represent. Can we now start by a show of hands? We'll take 1, 2. Any other questions? Right. Let's take the first 2 questions.
Hi there, Gareth van Zyl from Fin24. I'd just like to ask why the findings of the report have taken approximately a few years to sort of come to its conclusive end right now. I mean, obviously the CWU asked you to investigate this, I think, in 2011. What were some of the delays around that, and why has it taken so long to get to this point? Thanks.
Good afternoon, Protector. Simon Hiradin from the Record newspaper and not the Daily Sun anymore. My question relates to the Centurion Vision development. In the KPMG report, it was found there was a corrupt relationship. You said that the relationship between them was maladministration and improper or unlawful enrichment, and also that the relationship was poisoned. Who then takes action against the owners of the office park? Would that be you, or would it be other entities? Thank you.
Thank you. The Public Protector will respond.
Thank you for those questions. Firstly, to Gareth van Say, why did it take so long? It's approximately 4 years. It's a number of factors, but two key factors are the fact that we didn't get all of the information required. In fact, we've concluded this investigation without some of the information. We met with the board in January, the new board, and we're still trying to get some of the information. And we were grateful that some of the information was given to us, but a number of documents were not supplied. That's why we were not able to even conclude or to make conclusive findings. An example in this regard is the project management. We got a general flow of information around how the contracting of external companies to manage the sourcing of other companies had happened, but we didn't get specifics. For us to do a proper investigation, we need all of the bid documents, the submissions. It would be forms of memo, it would be the adverts if there were adverts, and the submissions that were made by the companies concerned. In that case, we would then know who are the parties. The same thing happened with regard to the labor brokers. We didn't get a lot of information initially. We got some information recently, but we're not even going to indicate how we got some of the information we finally used. But again, it was a couple of weeks ago. The second reason there was a delay is how we work, and we are finalizing our strategic direction now to look at how we work. Previously, how we worked was we assigned our investigators a lot of investigations without looking at human capacity. You will find that this investigator, for example, was investigating alone, which is not head off from any institutions that do these kinds of investigations. You would have a team of about 3, 4, or 5 people coming from a multidisciplinary background doing these kinds of investigations. My team just came back from Singapore. They were just horrified about the difference between Singapore, the bureau there. Maybe the Public Protector can elaborate on that. They were horrified about the difference between the resources we're allocating to these important investigations and what is happening in Singapore. We've been to Canada as well. So with those two things, not getting information in time and the inadequate resources, but also how then we've been managing the inadequate resources. Going forward, we're considering totally parking some investigations or even not even taking them at all, so that we can realistically assign investigations to our teams. The Public Protector, the Deputy Public Protector may elaborate on the process we are currently undergoing to look at our workload model. Ms. Simone from Record. The question was,
Centurion Vision.
who takes the action against Centurion Vision? In the report, Ms. Heredin, we have indicated that it should be the South African Post Office, because we haven't said that the South African Post Office should take action against Centurion Vision. We simply said that the South African Post Office should look at the report where we have made a finding of the violation of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. That has to be reported to the police because it's a crime. And they will do that. Ours would be then to follow on remedial action after a while, within a month, and later within 6 months, to see if everything we asked for had been done. David Protector, do you want to say something about our workload distribution?
That's a media conference on its own. So, but I think that the point has been made earlier on about. But what I just want to maybe highlight is just the narrative that is coming out from this investigation is there is a link between conduct failure and service failure. You know the challenges, you've seen the challenges that have been, that the post office has had over the past few years. Earlier this year they didn't have stamps. You saw that. They couldn't pay salaries, they couldn't do a lot of things. So, and then of course, I just to respond to the question on Centurion Vision entities. As the Public Protector was speaking, I was going through the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. There's a very nice, elaborate discussion on that. What happens when people are found with property and things that they shouldn't have. That's what we picked up in Singapore last week. And we're not looking at the Western model. Asian, East, our own people. And they're getting it right. It's very clear, madam, you take back things that have not been acquired properly. That's the law of the country. Look at Chapter 3 of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. Just look through the entire act, because we are not the enforcer and implementer of that act, but it is the law of the country as well. Thanks a lot, PP.
Thank you, David Protector. Just to confirm that we are one of the agencies that has a role in the implementation.
Yes.
However, the findings of corruption were not made by us. Had this office been the one that had made a finding of corruption based on our own evidence, we would then implement the provisions of the Public Protector Act, which says that when we make such discovery in terms of Section 7, we should then refer the matter for prosecution by the NPA. But we can only do that if we have investigated and we have a docket that is similar to the police, where by our own instruments we've made that finding of corruption.
Thank you, Public Protector. Are there more questions from the floor? Right, there's one hand up. And behind the lady. Anyone else? Thank you. We'll take those two questions.
Advocate Madonsela, good afternoon. I'm Janine Neresis from Corruption Watch. You alluded to just a few moments ago to the fact that your office does do follow-ups in connection with the implementation of remedial action. I would just like to know if we may know the results of those follow-ups. We, the public, it is.
Right, yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, I'm Graham Huskin from the Times newspaper. In terms of the documents that weren't provided, were you able to establish, was that a deliberate move by members of the Post Office Board or people to deliberately frustrate your investigation? And with you, you made a comment earlier saying that you couldn't make all of your findings, conclusive finding, are you going to be doing a follow-up report on the post office report that you've just released now?
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Janine Erasmus. And thank you for the good work that Corruption Watch is doing. We do follow up on remedial action. We do issue a quarterly report, but we haven't previously made it public because it's only recently that we engage a full-time compliance officer. Officers like us, for example, would issue those quarterly reports. A good example, if you go on the website, is Pakistan, where you will see their indication of how many were implemented, and for those who didn't implement, how many did they end up having defiance proceedings, which would be, in our case, contempt proceedings against them. Hopefully now, as we go forward, we will make our quarterly reports public. We do them for ourselves, but if it goes public, obviously we'd have to tighten it a bit. And it just indicates what we decided and the different aspects of remedial action that we ordered and the extent of compliance. The media, on the other hand, asks us for compliance reports every day. It's almost Ms. Masibi's full-time job to report on what has happened with this one, apart from also being held accountable for the ones that are still on the pipeline. Mr. Graham Hoskin from Times, we haven't established why we didn't get the documents, except for the old ones, with regard to the labor brokers. We were asked to investigate something that had started happening 10 years ago, because our investigation was requested in 2011, and the employment of labor brokers had started around 2001, 2002, and a lot of the documents from 2002 were not available. They said they were in the archives, and when they checked, they couldn't find them. Of the recent documents, it's a bit peculiar that our investigation started earlier in the year, or we were requested to investigate earlier in the year in 2011, and we duly informed the then management of the South African Post Office. We got some documents, but we didn't get all, especially the detailed ones. The South African Post Office, after that, and whilst we were still investigating, commissioned KPMG and another consulting firm to conduct investigations. Seemingly, they got the documents that we're not getting. And seemingly, the SIU got some of the documents that we're not getting. I don't want to get to the politics of it. What I do like is that the current board of directors of the South African Post Office has been very helpful, met with us, and within hours provided us with whatever information we needed, which was within their power to provide. Thank you.
There's a follow-up question from Graham. Any other questions on this side?
Just a follow-up question. I know you said that you, in terms of the 22 million rand that was spent on the rent for the empty building, there's efforts going to be made to have that money recovered. In terms of the 2.7 billion rand that was spent on the labour brokers, are you recommending, or are you requesting, or ordering that that money also be recovered as well, given the vast amount of money that it equates to?
Thank you again, Mr. Graham Hoskin. with the 22 million rand, we are asking the management of the South African Post Office to collect this money. It's not the only money that was prepaid to the owners of the Eco Park building. Previously it had happened and KPMG investigated. When it was found that the amount had been paid unduly, it was recovered, or it was recovered through rental, through not paying certain amounts of rental. In this case, I believe they could still do the same because the South African Post Office is still in the building and it could request that the money be offset against rental that is due, but it has to be something that is agreed to properly. We've looked at the contract. I mean, right up to the last minute, we're still looking at the contract. The contract was very clear that the money would only be payable on occupation. No, either on the 1st of May, I think a particular day in May, I think it was supposed to be May 2011, or on occupation, whatever date the occupation took place. So we're very clear about that. From our side, we'll then follow up with management to just make sure that it gets done. With regard to staff members that were responsible for these mistakes, the South African Post Office did take action. Some were subjected to disciplinary action, and some were released from their contracts on arrangements after disciplinary proceedings had started. There's only 2 employees that were flagged in the report that, based on the evidence, we see that no action was taken against them, and we're requesting that it should be taken. The other question was about the labor brokers. A lot of the labor brokers, as I indicated, were employed from 2002 right up to 2012. The KPMG report dealt with them, and some of the money, it was indicated that the money should have been collected. What we have requested the South African Post Office is that the KPMG report be implemented, the SIU report be implemented, to make sure that whatever these reports are saying should be done. We just avoided repeating what is in those reports, particularly the SIU report, because that is a report that is submitted to the President and not us. In the absence of any further questions or comments, okay, I would also, just before I give to the Deputy Public Protector for the final word, I would like to thank the Good Governance and Integrity team that worked on this report. Even though initially there was a single investigator, eventually towards the end of the investigation, the entire team has to pitch in. Even though each investigator has dozens of investigations on their own lap, they have to pitch in to make sure that we can finalize a particular investigation, and I am grateful for the assistance. I will not mention your names because with these investigations, the team members are increasingly refusing to sit on the panel because sometimes it gets a little bit nasty with the people affected by the reports. But thank you again to the team, and thank you to the rest of the Public Protector team for providing the support that makes it possible for these investigations to take place. Thank you to you too for being here and for continuing to have an interest in our work. I am going to allow the Public Protector, the Deputy Public Protector, to say a few things, and then Ms. Masibi will close.
Okay, thanks. Now the Public Protector has given you the last word. I am giving you a housekeeping issue. Basically, as I mentioned earlier on, we are proceeding with our Cleveland's intervention in KwaZulu-Natal, and the media was there last time. Members of the media were there last time. So from Thursday, is it the 25th? From 12 o'clock, we will be back at the hostel. I know a lot of you are scared of these type of things, but we will have police. We will have police presence there to secure people's security and so forth. So 12 o'clock, those who are based especially in the KZN area, please feel free to join us, because we really want you to get a sense of how these kind of interventions work. And of course, that 22 million that was mentioned could have fixed quite a lot at that hostel. So you must always link it that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you. The Public Protector will do one-on-one interviews. Thanks to you all.
I was worried I was battling to figure it out myself. That big number.
You want?
Saying that big number.
Yeah, because I didn't read it before, and I thought,
I don't ever feel
and you caught me. But that's what I actually do with this report. When the fever does